All right, welcome to the Lovecraft Easing videocast and podcast. This is February the 12th, 2017, and our guest today is Ellen Datlow. Hey, Ellen.
Hi there.
And Ellen's cat, Bella.
Bella. It's Bella. Here she is. Hopefully she won't interrupt too much.
That's all right. I actually emailed her earlier. I'm really here to interview her, so.
Okay. I'll make sure she answers the questions wisely.
Okay. Let's do short introductions real quick, and then we'll talk to Ellen. I'm Mike Davis, Lovecraft Easing guy. Let's start with Kelly. Work our way over.
I'm Kelly Young. I am the executive editor of Strange Eons magazine.
Excuse me.
Matt.
I'm not going to cough at that. My name's Matt Carpenter. I edit. I don't even want to say this in your presence. I'm here. Okay.
What?
My books are so little.
SB.
SP Miskowski, I write fiction.
All right, and I'm going to read this from Ellen Datlow's website. Actually, we got prizes. I'm sorry. Let's do the prizes, and then we'll get to Ellen's introduction. I have got courtesy of Kevin Wilson, Edge of Dark Water by Joe Lansdale. Kevin, if you're listening, I don't believe we've given that one away yet. So that's the first prize, and then Matt has something strange to give away.
Here is an anthology titled Eldritch Embraces, Putting the Love Back in Lovecraft.
Our new slogan.
Exactly erotica, but kind of like Eldritch Blue way back 10 years ago. It's themed around love and sex. And this is mostly original fiction. One or two stories have been published before. It's got quite nice artwork, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not my cup of tea, but I like the cover. It's pretty cool. All right, so we'll tell you how to give those. We'll tell you how you can win those a little bit later. I'm reading this from Ellen's website. Ellen Datlow has been editing science fiction, fantasy, and horror short fiction for over 35 years as fiction editor of Omni Magazine and editor of Event Horizon and Sci Fiction. She currently acquires short fiction for Tor.com. In addition, she has edited more than 100 science fiction, fantasy, and horror anthologies, and then it lists a whole bunch of them. So thanks for being on the show, Ellen.
Thank you for having me. I like your lantern behind you. Is that a real pumpkin? Because
no, I found that
it lasted a long time. I've had it since Halloween.
I found that at a garage sale, and my wife said, "No, you're not taking that home," and I took it home. So, but the compromise was that I would keep it in my office. So
I thought it meant podcasting from the garage.
Yeah. So let's start off with Children of Lovecraft, and you've got another book out too, Dark Feathers, is that right?
Black Feathers.
Black Feathers, I'm sorry. I've looked at this one, got a copy of this one. Let's start with Black Feathers then. What's that about?
Dark avian horror. In other words, horror stories about birds. Actually, some dark fantasy, mostly horror. And the stories all are original except for two reprints. The reprints are one by Nicholas Royal and one by M. John Harrison. And the rest are all original. So, by people like Paul Tremblay and Jeff Ford, and I'm blanking.
That's a bit of a different theme.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was going to say that's a bit of a different theme. How did that come about?
Well, I'm always trying to think of new themes, of themes that I haven't used before and that aren't overly used, if possible. And the only one I could find about birds was one actually edited by Nick Royal in England called Murmurations about 15 years ago, I think. So I thought, it's what the publishers will buy and, and ideas that I think I can work with. I usually have some thematic ideas floating around, and if I'm lucky, I can sell them. If not, I hang on to them, and maybe a few years later, I can sell them. So Black Feathers was one. The dark. Although the perfect title, of course, would be Black Wings, but I can't use that because of the Yoshi series. So I was like, okay, what else can I call it? And then initially, the publisher, who's not really a genre publisher, it's Pegasus Books. Every once in a while, he would say Black wings. I said, no, it's not black wings, it's black feathers. Stop it. Don't say black wings. Don't do that by accident. It's black feathers. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's challenging. I'm always trying to think of new themes.
Is that one out now?
Yes, it just came out just about a week ago, in fact, last Tuesday. It's hardcover. It's really beautiful. The cover is by Rowena Kai. I'm not sure if that's how I pronounce her name. It's C-A-I is the last name. And it's really a gorgeous looking book. And I forget how many stories it has, but it's, it's gotten really good reviews so far, which is always gratifying. Always a relief. The first reviews are, no matter how long I've been editing, you still worry about the reviews until they start coming in. It's like, oh no, it's like, oh, I'm getting bad reviews or good reviews. So far they're pretty good.
Well, that's interesting. When you're worried about those first reviews, where are you looking? Everywhere or mainly?
Well, wherever I think they're going to be. I mean, the interesting thing for Black Feathers is the publisher sent it out to a bunch of mystery websites and blog sites, and they're getting, so the mystery, it's being sold, or at least it's being marketed not only as horror, but in mystery and crime, and that field seems to be embracing it too. I don't know what the percentage of people who actually read those reviews are buying it, but was kind of interesting to me. I didn't expect that, So I wish all my publishers would do that, or would try to do that, expand beyond just the typical horror sites and magazines to get their story, the reviews for books.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting to hear that even after almost 30 years, you're still waiting for nervous about those first reviews, because I know I am the very few books I've edited.
Huh? Oh yeah. Well, you're always, and if the first one or two are bad, you're like, oh my God, it's like, oh no. Yeah. And what else is gratifying is when you have stories that you weren't sure about, that you've worked on. Most of the stories I've read several times by the time they are in print. And some of them, I worked on them so much and with so many revisions, you're not sure how good they are or how they came out at the end, because you just have read them so many times, so close to them as much as the writer is. Yeah. And so when people point out, oh, we really like this one, that's also a relief, because, it's like, oh my God, thank God that story that we worked so hard on, it came out okay and they get it. So that too, that's part of the whole anxiety, not anxiety exactly, but stress of waiting for your reviews to see who likes which stories and, which ones really seem to hit people.
I have to say that you're choosing an anthology theme is just kind of fascinating to me, because I was just actually reading The Cutting Room. Because I picked it up, not because you edited it, although that was nice. It was because it was themed stories about something I found interesting after that really wonderful novel came out last year.
Gemma Files's or another one?
Yes, Gemma Files's.
Film. Yeah.
It made me really want to read more stories, kind of, not like that, but centered around movies and the movie biz. And so I found that was a very attractive theme. Looking back, it's like you always have these really fascinating choices of themes. But our particular interest, of course, the name of the show is Lovecraft. You've 3 rather recent Lovecraftian anthologies, which are all sort of similar. I mean, they each have their own unique characteristics. I was wondering if you could comment on that a little bit. Is it because of just the popularity amongst publishers right now for that sort of stuff?
Everyone seems to think that Lovecraft sells and sells all the time. Although I did I really enjoyed doing editing Lovecraft Unbound, and I assumed it would be a one-off. I wasn't clamoring to do more Lovecraftian anthologies, but the thing is, The Cutting Room and Lovecraft's Monsters are both reprint anthologies, and Tachyon does my reprint anthologies. They can't really afford to commission original anthologies, so I talked to Jacob, who's the publisher, and we've tried to figure out what he thinks will sell. So that's how we came up with Lovecraft's Monsters. We didn't want to have the same thing. He wanted a variation. I said, so we figured out, okay, we'll try to do it. reprint anthology of stories that have at least one or more of Lovecraft's creatures, not starring, but you're prominent in it. So that's how that came about. And I've been doing anthologies with Dark Horse for several years. The first one was Lovecraft Unbound, I think, was my first one for them. And then I did a couple of other Supernatural More and Nightmare Carnival. And then this one, and it's always, again, it's talking to the publisher and what do you want? What will you sell? What do you think you can sell? And they thought they wanted to do another Lovecraftian one with me. And I said, okay. Because I know that I can get my writers to write interesting stories that are not pastiches. And I tried to get different writers in the second, in Children of Lovecraft than I had in Lovecraft Unbound, some different writers. And so, that's why they come about. It's partly marketing. It's partly because, yes, the publisher and I come to an agreement that we think we can do it. Someone else had approached me about doing another Lovecraftian one right after, and I said, no. First of all, I didn't want to do one. I don't want to do another one right now. Maybe in 5 years, I'll want to. But, it gets boring for me. I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. I had no problem doing another original Lovecraftian one because the first one, I don't remember when Lovecraft Unbound came out, but at least 10 years ago. So to me, that was all right, 10 years between those. I don't mind that, but I have no desire to do another one right away. So it's partly, it's what I can sell. I can't sell it. I wanted to do an all original movie horror anthology, and I couldn't sell it. So I was happy to be able to do a reprint one, at least. So, it depends. It's partly what I am interested in, and then also what the publishers are willing to buy. I've had ideas that I can't sell, for years, and sometimes eventually they will sell to somebody. I cannot work on something that doesn't interest me because I know I have to spend a few years on it. It's like I have to work with the author, commission people to write stories for me and contact the writers and bug them and work with the stories if I buy them. And I don't want to spend 2 years of my life on something I hate. So it has to be something I'm interested in, a theme that's broad enough that I think can be broad enough to interest me as well as writers.
And Ellen, to what extent do you try to invite writers that you think will be passionate or interested in that particular theme? And to what extent are you interested in just inviting writers and then seeing what they will do with that theme? Do you concern yourself with that? Do you think about, well, this is a theme that would probably be most interesting to these people, and then send out invitations? And how many people do you typically invite in order to get the amount of material you need?
Well, yes, I do. First, I go after the writers who I've worked with, who I know what they've done and think they might be interested in the theme. And some are totally not. I just did an Alice in Wonderland anthology that's coming out in the fall from Tor called Mad Hatters and March Hares. And I asked a couple of people, or at least one person said, I hated Alice in Wonderland. How could you hate Alice in Wonderland? Okay, I thought you'd like it, So, you go to people and you don't know. Or you go to someone who said, I'll try to go to someone who I think could do a good Lovecraftian story, and they say, I hate Lovecraft. No, I don't want to do it. Well, you could do an anti-Lovecraft story. Once in a while I can get someone to do that kind of thing that isn't anti, not in the sense that it's offensive toward Lovecraft necessarily, or the antithesis of what he's doing, but they're just don't like him. Like, for example, in Lovecraft Unbound, I had a story by Rick Bowes, who's a friend of mine. And his story, I can't remember, it's a librarian finding the Necronomicon in his office or something. I forget what it's called. Mm-hmm. He hates Lovecraft, but he wrote one good Lovecraftian story, but sometimes, he'll just say no, or someone else will just say, no, I don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. So yes, that's, and also it's serendipity. I don't usually have open markets because I don't want to have so much coming in that I'm going to have to read it all. Yeah, exactly. Unless I have someone reading it for me, which I have had when I've collaborated on things. What I'll do is I usually ask a third more of the people than I need, because generally a third of the people drop out for one reason or another. Either they don't have the time, they don't have an idea, or the story just doesn't quite work. So you have to, as an anthologist, you can't commit, ask writers for 15 writers for stories and assume that they're all going to be great or that they're even going to come in. You cannot do that because you'll be screwed otherwise, and you'll suddenly have not enough stories. So yeah, you have to ask more. And the only time I've had a problem with that, Terry and I think it was our book, Queen Victoria's book with spells, and that was the only one where we actually got an overage, of stories that were publishable after we had enough stories, and we had to turn a few down. I mean, I guess if they were so brilliant we couldn't turn them down, we would have taken them. But it was like they weren't as so brilliant that we would break the book for it, shall we say? So that's the only time I've ever had too many stories come in for any anthology. When I've worked that way. I mean, of course, with reprints, it's completely different because you're choosing whatever's out there already.
I think you said that Joyce Carol Oates didn't have a doll story for the doll collection, and then all of a sudden she did. She wasn't sure she would have one, and then immediately she thought of one and wrote one for you.
The next day. Well, not the next day, the next week. And the thing is, I hadn't sold the anthology yet. I mean, that was the first story that came in, and after 2 years or a year and a half, I didn't sell the anthology, and I wanted to give it back to her. She said, no, hold it, because, I wouldn't have written it otherwise. And luckily, soon after that, I did sell the anthology. She's also in Black Feathers. She wrote a very good story. That's kind of a crime story, I guess. It's a mystery, sort of. But yeah, I mean, some people write that way. She's like that. I mean, I'll ask her for a story, and it's if it hits her at the time, she'll write something, and but you can't. There are some writers I know I can count on. I know that if they say they're going to write something for me, that they will. Even if they're late, like John Langan all the time. I don't know.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, he's always late. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I have people who are reliable, and those are the people you go to first when you're doing an anthology, because they are reliable. I mean, if I go to 10 people or 15 people, and I have never worked with any of them before, and I don't know if the story is going to work. I mean, only a few people I know whose almost every story of theirs I love. I mean, Jeff Ford's one of those people. He usually writes right on the nail. Although sometimes it's tough because he's not, for a theme thing, it's kind of confusing. Not confusing, but it may not work. I can't remember. I think he wrote something for the Hallows Eve anthology for HWA. And the first thing didn't work. I can't remember. I'm not sure if it was for that or something else. He wrote a story. It was a mess. He admitted it was a mess. I mean, there was no okay, I don't understand. What's the point? I think he eventually rewrote that story and sold it elsewhere. But he started from scratch, and sometimes you do that. I wouldn't feel comfortable asking someone I hadn't worked with before to do that. I mean, I might say, if you want to take another shot, take another shot. But it's tough because I don't want to hurt the writer's feelings. I don't want them to feel. If you're asking for stories, the writer has to realize it's not a definite buy. I'm not going to definitely buy your story just because I've asked you for a story. But the people who you work with a lot, you usually know you can count on them to produce what you need for the particular market, whatever it is you're working on.
And with all that in mind, you usually ask about a third more than you think you're going to need.
Oh yeah, always. Yeah. No.
Kelly, you have a question?
Drop out like flies.
Kelly, you have a question?
Yeah, Ellen, 30 or so years ago, when all my friends and I were reading geeky magazines like Starlog and everything, I was given as a gift a subscription to Omni magazine. And I didn't always get what was going on in it, but it sure made me feel very smart, or at least smarter than my friends who are reading Starlog and Fangoria. And that was, you had been fiction editing for them for a couple of years, and then you went on to fiction edit for them, I think, all the way to the end, right? Can you talk a little bit about your time with Omni?
Well, I was there about 17 years. I mean, I started there in about 19. Well, it began October 78, I think, and I started working there maybe in 79 or 80. I started hanging out or looking for a job there. And I was hired as associate fiction editor to Robert Sheckley when he was brought in by Ben Bova, who had just been promoted to the editor of the magazine. And I worked as the associate fiction editor with Bob for about 1.5 years or so until he left. And neither of us knew how it actually worked, in the sense that usually when you have the editor, the fiction editor, reading the good stuff, the solicited material, and the assistant or associate usually reads the slush and hands up, passes on stuff that they like. But because neither of us knew how to do that, this is how he was supposed to do it, I basically read everything first, unless someone sent him a story personally, which is very seldom. So basically I learned on the job, and I had a lot of influence in what we bought. And I did all the editing, whatever editing there was, but I learned it on the job. And when Bob left, first he took a leave of absence for the summer. He took the job because he had writer's block, and he needed the money, and I don't think he ever had a full-time job in his life. And this was like heaven for him, I'm sure. He had a huge expense account, he was like, it's seventh heaven. Except he did this is a downside of publishing people of being an editor occasionally. Michael Schauer, who wrote Killer Angel, he's dead now, so I can talk about this. I would talk about it anyway, but he wrote Killer Angels, which won the Pulitzer, I think, for nonfiction. And he used to write science fiction and fantasy, which I had no idea. At the time. He submitted a story to Bob, and Bob turned it down. I don't remember if I had even seen it. I'm not sure I saw it or not. And Sharon never talked to him again. I don't know if they ever talked very much before, but he basically was so pissed off that how could you turn down this story? And that's just so unprofessional. It's like, really? I realized, like, this is, even then when it was just starting out, I was like, what? Are you kidding me? So I forget. So I worked at Omni for 17 years. So Bob took off a couple of months to write. And then I was acting fiction editor, and he was supposed to come back in September, or in August, but he wanted to take more time, and Ben Bova said, forget it. So I was made provisional fiction editor. I kind of had to prove myself. But I was basically buying the stuff, and certainly editing it and, having an influence on that before Bob left. So basically that's what I was doing. And initially, we were saying, oh, you can't buy anything. You have to buy science fiction. You can't buy horror. You can't do that. So there were stories that I would have taken that I had to turn down, that I would have liked to have taken. But over time, it just became easier for me to buy whatever I wanted, in a few years. And basically after Bob, after Ben Bova left, there was no one there who really cared about the fiction. So, which was good, because it means I had pretty much total control over it. There was no one to say, no one really looked over my shoulder that much. There were times when I did have bosses. Now, I'm sorry, I'm going to.
Oh, that's fine.
Over time in Omni, there were 5 editors at least over 20 years of time, which is a lot, like every few years they left.
Yeah.
And occasionally there were people who I usually got along with them okay. They left me alone, and I was happy to do what I was doing. And sometimes there were editors who wanted to make their mark and wanted to have more influence on me. For whatever reason.
I think something's going around too. Are you catching it?
No, it's just I'm not used to talking so much at one time. I probably should get a cough drop, but
I killed Ellen Datlow with my Omni question.
Thanks a lot, Kelly.
So anyway, yes, I was there 17 years, and it was a great job, and I loved it. And I worked. We were the first, very early online publication. And even before we started the Omni Online officially, for a few years, we actually did, I think it was Ford, some big car company, sponsored novellas. Okay, remember when AOL had content?
Oh yeah.
Right.
They had this back end someplace that had that content. Well, we commissioned like 5 or 6 novellas that went on AOL. I don't know where the hell they appeared. I'm not sure I ever saw them.
You know, it was on dial-up and always would load so slowly. You know that AOL content.
Yeah, I don't understand even where it was, but that was our first movement online. And Ford paid a lot of money. We had paid a lot of money for the novellas. We had one by Dan Simmons. Silverberg had done a couple. Had Cadigan. I forget. I mean, we had some really Jack Dan. You know, we had a series of novellas that we commissioned, and they came out really well. And that was our first kind of tiptoeing online on this weird AOL site. So, and I don't remember what year that was. That was maybe 95, 94. I'd have to look it up.
Sounds about
Anyway,
right.
so that was about Omni. Omni was great to work at. I mean, you know, luckily most of my bosses shielded me from Bob and Kathy. We were always Bob and Kathy. Kathy more than Bob kind of, well, loved Omni. I mean, they started it. You know, Bob Guccione and Kathy Keaton. And Kathy loved science fiction. She loved science. And they also were the king and queen kind of thing. So, you know, I was luckily protected by most of my bosses to do what I want, and not, you know, once in a while you say, oh, you have to do this, you know, we have to do excerpts from this. I hated doing excerpts. To me, excerpts are a waste of space. I'd much rather do an original story, but oh no, you have to do an excerpt here, that. It's like, ugh. You know, but mostly, you know, with the nonfiction, it was like, oh, we want you to cover this UFO thing, you know, in the nonfiction area, and like you know, all the head editor had to like negotiate this and not try to not lose our credibility by looking at it skeptically, and it was a real hard line to walk. But luckily for the fiction, I was, as I said, I was pretty protected from their whims, which is a good thing.
And I think I just read that they're rebooting as a online.
There's 2 Omnis right now. There's a reboot that was created by the person who bought Bob Guccione's storage locker and thought he had, well, anyway, and he's got a reboot. And then my former colleagues and I we have Omni Online too. So we're seeing what's happening, you know, we're both dealing with that. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
Did you read, I'm sorry, Kelly.
Go ahead, SP. It's fine.
Did you first read Pat Cadigan's work when you were at Omni, or did you know her or know of her before?
No, I didn't know anybody before because Omni was my first science fiction job. Before that, I was working in mainstream book publishing. Mm-hmm. No, I read, when I got to Omni, I started reading all these anthologies of new writers, and Pat and some other people were in the Berkeley, it wasn't the Berkeley, it might have been, oh God, what was his name? Chrysalis series, and I forget the editor's name. He did a series of new writers and Berkeley Showcase. And I found a story by Pat in there that I really liked. I don't remember which one. And other writers too. And I contacted them all and asked them to send me stories. And that's how I got in touch with Pat. And she'd probably remember better than I do where we actually met. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure when we met. But that's what happened. I mean, I got in touch with a bunch of writers. I wrote, apparently, I don't remember this, but my papers are all in Liverpool, University of Liverpool. And a Polish friend was doing research, and he said, did you ever hear back from Gabriel Garcia Marquez? I said, why, did I write him? He said, yep, you wrote him and asked for a story. I said, no, I never heard back from him. But I wrote all kinds of people, and that's probably how I got in touch with Joyce Carol Oates. And I first published her on Omni. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, let me give your voice a break for at least a few seconds here and read something from an audience watcher, from the audience. He writes, her summations in her yearly horror anthologies are just as interesting as the stories and make me read the stuff that she left out. So,
Oh, thank you. Thank the person. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's some people hate them and some people like them. And I mean, Ed Bryant, Ed Bryant just died, which is horrible, which is
Yeah.
sad. I don't know.
Yeah.
But he'd said, it's a snapshot of the year. I mean, I used to put the news to the publishing news, but once the internet became ubiquitous, I said, what's the point? It's going to be dated in a year anyway. So I do cover as much as I can find if I see it. It's like, it's not exhaustive, but I do try to recommend the things that I like. When I was doing co-editing the Year's Best Fantasy and Horror, the first few years, I guess I did some negative reviews of things. And the packager at the time, Jim Frankel, said, "Are you sure you want to do that? It's not like a magazine where it goes away. It'll be a book and it'll be there for a long time." And I said, maybe you have a point.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be the year's best, and what I just mentioned, usually the things that I really like, rather than talk about things that are terrible.
How are anthologies selling these days, Ellen?
Same as always. Some do well, some don't, as far as I know. As long as publishers keep buying my anthologies, I guess they're doing well enough. Some I get royalties from, and some I don't.
What is good? I mean, how many copies do you sell, say, to say that this has been a success? Or is it that the writers all got
paid? If it earns out. I mean, basically, if it earns out, sorry. You get it with I was saying Norm, with big publishers. With publishers, mostly you get an advance against royalties. Now, my agent sold 2 of my anthologies for a lot of money. Those books never earned out. They never will earn out. However, one of them sold 27,000 copies in hardcover, which is fantastic. But and I don't have to say, well, it never earned out. But that would never earned out because I paid too much for it. But most anthologies, you don't get paid as much as I did for that. Much, much less. And so if you only get a few $1,000s for reprint anthologies. Maybe you get for original, you get a little bit more. So basically, let's say, I don't remember what I get for my year's best, but if I figured it out, I'm paying them to do it. If you figure it out by the hour. But anyway, I get an advance. And basically, in the contract, if the book earns out, which means if it sells enough and goes beyond and makes enough of that advance, then you make royalties, and I split that with the writers. And I have some of my older books were sold to e-rights were sold, so we make more money from that. And if audio rights have just been sold in the last few years, and that makes more money. So I can't say how many copies it is necessarily. Usually the print runs a few thousand. For, I would say, 4,000 or 5,000 maybe for the most best of the years. I'm not really sure.
So let's say there's writers out there, and I know they're out there, and they're wondering, so how do I get on Ellen Datlow's radar? What would you say to that?
Stories in a place that I'll see. I mean, yep. I try to see every year there are more and more anthologies coming out. Excuse me. And it's hard. People don't send me everything. I mean, I sometimes have to nag publishers to send me the anthologies. Some of them are terrible. And they're not, I'll look at them. Either I'll look at them, or if they look really bad, I have a reader who reads for me. She mostly reads things that are not strictly horror. I mean, she'll look at Asimov's and Analog to see if there's any horror in there. But I'll also give her an anthology if I do a spot check and it looks terrible, and because sometimes there's a really good story in there. So basically, if you are in an anthology, I would advise writers, don't be so desperate to get published that you're going to be published any place. Try to hold off to being published someplace that's actually creditable and people will reach, and that will reach a market. Be patient. Everyone wants to have a collection out. But if no one knows who you are and you've only sold in places, markets that no one's ever heard of, no one's going to buy your collection. Wait until you have really great stories. Wait until you have a few credits under your belt, and then have your collection published, because it'll make a splash. Otherwise, no one's going to notice it anyway. But as far as me seeing the work, I usually see it. I mean, I can't say that I see everything. I don't. I mean, there's so much out there. I'm always going to miss things. But I do try to read widely and as much as I can, and to see what's out there and who the new writers are.
Would you say you read more horror than anything else, or is that?
It's the only thing I read,
Okay.
unfortunately. I mean,
I guess I was thinking
of
of dark fantasy as something.
Well, that's
different.
it. I mean, I read dark fantasy and I see it's dark fantasy. It's like, it's not horror. I mean, sometimes there's a fine line. So a lot of what I read is dark, but not dark enough for me to consider horror. And so when I'm reading for the year's best, it's a waste of my time, which doesn't mean it's not great or very good, but it's just not what I'm looking for when I'm working. And I'm working all the time, reading short stories that I hope are horror. You know, I mean, that's the problem. You know, it's like, I would like to read more. I would like to have the time to read other things. And you never once I think, well, maybe I should just stop doing this. Because then I can read whatever I want. But, you know, it's like, nah. You know, I mean, there's some wonderful horror out there. And yes, there's a difference between fantasy and dark fantasy and horror. There's also a difference between weird and, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's weird that's not horror. There's a lot of weird, I think, overlaps more with dark fantasy than it does with horror, although, of course, there is both. And there is horror fiction that is weird fiction. So, you know, there are, and it's all, that kind of judgment call is subjective. I mean, I'm just covering Paula Garan's best dark fantasy and horror. And she has more leeway in what she's doing because she is doing both. I'm trying to not do dark fantasy. I'm trying to do horror. I mean, in my best of the year. You know, and then there are many different bests of the year right now. There's one first year came out, I think. I can't remember the exact title, but it's the best extreme horror, something like that. And the stories in it, I don't think I've read most of them. I mean, they appeared in venues that I don't cover. And the thing is, I probably wouldn't like them anyway, because I don't really like what is considered extreme horror. You know, usually. It's very seldom that something like that is going to interest me.
So you're a consulting editor, right, for Tor.com?
Yeah. Yeah, I am.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I acquire short stories for Tor.com. I don't have there's no slush pile. I mean, every once in a while they open the slush pile and someone there reads it. But I mean, I just read, I get a few stories from people who I know and who I've worked with. I'm looking more for science fiction these days because it was hard to, I've been doing this for like 2 or 3 years already. And because I'm known as a horror editor now, I mean, even though I started as a science fiction editor, it's hard to get people to write science fiction for me. So it's taken this long for me to start getting science fiction in. And last year, I had about 4 stories I acquired with science fiction. And that was satisfying. But I basically can buy what I want as long as we're open. I mean, there are like a handful of us buying stories for them. Anne Vandermeer is. And we're all freelance. And so I think Jonathan Strawn is now too. Although he's been buying more novellas. The novella thing is different. We used to do novellas online, and now we're not. We're doing them as a book series. So that means they're not paid for by the word anymore. They're paid for like the division does a P&L, which is a profit and loss statement, like what they do for regular books. And so
like mapping the interior just came out, or it was about to come out.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, it came out already?
I said it was about to come out.
Right, yeah. And the Ballad of Black Tom. Although, see, at that time, it was before I didn't acquire that specifically for the novella program. I mean, I did and I didn't. The thing is, Tor.com was closed for a few months because we were overbooked. So that came in, the Ballad of Black Tom, and I said, I really want that. And well, Irene Gallo, who's kind of my boss, she said, well, maybe we can do it for the novella program. I said, okay, I'll ask Victor and also whatever you think will work. Sure. So we took it for the novella program. And yeah, I commissioned Stephen Graham Jones is mapping the interior. And I just handed in, Jeff Ford's got a novella that's just been handed into production. And Catherine Vaz, who's a writer who she's Portuguese-American, and I've worked with her in anthologies, and this is the first novella I've seen by her. And that was just handed in. Well, actually, not for production, I still have to edit it, but it was handed in for scheduling and for art. But anyway, for the short fiction, I can buy whatever I want, as long as we're open at the time. Because everyone, we were closed for a couple of months because, we bought too much, let's hold off. And I just bought another 2 stories, and we'll see. I've got a few other things on submission. So I'm doing that and the novellas. And I'm not used to editing novellas. They're long. They're really long. And it's like, no, I don't want, it's almost a novel, for Christ's sake, One novella came in by Kelly Robeson that's terrific. That's 39,000 words, which is, a novella is up to 40,000, and then it's a novel. And it's like, oh my God, I'm going to have to edit that thing. And it's, it's like, oh my gosh, it's really long. Which is kind of disconcerting when you're used to editing short stories and novelettes.
Yeah. SP, you had a question?
Yes.
Not so much a question, but I just wanted to say for the people who are tuning in, the inexpensive ebook novellas are a brilliant idea. I've bought several of them, and they're very exciting. And you look at the selections online and say, well, I don't know if I want to buy another book, but they're so inexpensive.
I just got a bunch of
they're very tempting. And so
this year,
the Tor novella series, it's a great idea. That's
and
all.
they're great little books too. You can get them either as books.
Yeah.
And the books are not cheap. They're $14.99.
But the novellas, the ebooks are they're very affordable, and I recommend that people take a look at the selections.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's a good idea. Yeah, the ebooks are really pretty cheap, and they're good reads. I've only read a couple of the novellas. I don't have time unless they're horror. Yeah, Cassandra Claus is very good. I forget what it's called. Something of Bones. I think. Actually, I bought a story of Something of Bones. I forget the title of her novella.
Yeah, I'm blanking on that too. I have a copy of that, but I haven't had a chance to get to
and
it
also Shauna Maguire's Doorways. And this is the sequel to it. What the heck is the first one called? Every Hearted Doorway was pretty good. I really liked it. So yeah. Yes. So that's what I'm busy doing.
So here's a quote from an interview you gave to sfsignal.com. I want you to elaborate on this because I found it very interesting.
Was it recent or old?
Last couple of years, I think.
Okay.
I don't remember. You wrote, but the hardest thing to avoid overall in buying short horror fiction, is stacking anthologies with stories about children or about adults looking back at a horrific or life-changing incident that happened to them as children.
Yep. That's still true. It seems to be a lot of horror, not as much. Well, yes. All right. I was just talking to someone about the novellas. I'm talking about someone pitching me a novella idea. And I just told her, don't do children. Now, these are not horror stories, okay? Mapping the Interior is horror. It's about a child, a young boy. Jeff Ford's novella is about kids, I think they're just out of high school, or maybe they're out of college, I can't remember. And then another one, Catherine Vaz, is about a 20-year-old. So I just told, in fact, Pat Cadigan, I said, whatever you do, I want adults. Would you please write a novella about adults, for Christ's sake? I don't want
this in the instructions. In the description of Hallows Eve, I think you emphasized this as well.
And we did get some stories with children, but that's the reason we said that is because that's all we knew. That's all we would get, especially about Halloween. You know. So yeah, for some reason, but these are not all horror novellas. As I said, Stephen Graham Jones is. Jeff Ford is actually in a horror novella. Catherine Vazis isn't horror. But for some reason, all these people are writing about young adults or kids. So like, no, I wanted something about adult. Kelly Rosen's about someone who's adult. Thank God, you know. So yes, but in horror, a lot of the times, it's because they're helpless and vulnerable, you know, children, and that's why people write the adult. The thing I was saying about the adult point of view, looking back at a childhood incident that either traumatized her and changed her life. I'm not sure why that is. That is a trope. And the other one that I find, especially in British, is like a couple are not doing so well and they go off on a trip and things horrible happen to them. It's like, you know, you get sick of it. I get sick of it. No, stop it. You know, think of different things. There are different things you can do with horror.
The reason I asked you earlier about Pat Cadigan is because in several of your anthologies, brilliant stories by many writers in the anthologies, but always when I read a Pat Cadigan story in one of your anthologies, it is so refreshing and so different and takes such a different point of view. Absolutely loved the story she wrote for you for the doll collection. Just out of nowhere, do you know, this odd person, this odd job, odd situation, and she wrote something fascinating.
She's good at that. She's really good.
I love that. I love that.
I think it helps. Some writers can write science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and I think that ability helps them. Well, it gives them three strands to work with in fantastic fiction. And I think that opens the imagination. I mean, there are a lot of people I work with like that. Jeff Ford does that, and Liz Hand. They can all write science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Just science fiction is kind of mushy science fiction, but you know. But I think that being able to move from one subgenre, the fantastic and the grotesque, to another is actually very healthy. Now, healthy is the wrong word, but it seems to be freeing of the imagination of these writers. Pat's one of those people. You know, I mean, people who are like strictly science fiction writers, I think it's harder to this is just like, I'm just throwing this out and thinking now. I don't even know if this makes sense, but it seems like there's strictures within science fiction, and fantasy as well, and horror as well. That's why I don't know what I'm saying. You know, this is bullshit. I don't know. I mean, but there are certain writers who can do all three, and they do seem to have more flexibility on some level.
Well, maybe it forces them to break up some of the standard horror tropes a little bit. Maybe they have to rethink.
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, there are writers who don't understand. I have people who I know who are writers, really good writers, who wanted to write for me. They wanted to write, I mean, horror, specifically horror for me. And I won't mention the name of someone I'm thinking of, but she couldn't write a horror story. Her stories were dark fantasy or fantasy. And she kept trying. She wrote a few stories, and I mean, I bought other stories for her for other things, but when she was trying to specifically write for a horror anthology, I said, no, that doesn't work. And I think she finally figured it out. I mean, in her own head, what I meant. I mean, I can tell people what I think the difference between dark fantasy and horror is, but it doesn't mean they're going to be able to write it, you know? I mean, because it's whatever your heart, wherever your brain and wherever your imagination takes you. Maybe you're not meant to be a horror writer. Maybe you are a dark fantasy writer, or maybe you can do both.
What are some of your...
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask, what are some of your favorite things about editing short fiction?
Finding a really great story that I love. You know, or that really moves me in some way, or an Alice anthology that's extraordinarily powerful, upsetting, and moving, and horror. Actually, it's kind of horror. I would say it's beyond dark fantasy, and that kind of story really, you know, when it gets me that way in an emotional way, it's kind of satisfying, and not many stories do that. But I mean, just finding a story that you think is terrific, or that really, you know, knocks your socks off is like really satisfying. And of course, I love working with my writers usually. So you know, the whole I love most of the process of editing. Because I'm reading so much, that's tiring and it's hard to focus. So the actual reading is not as pleasurable as I would like it to be, because I feel stressed about it. Yeah, but of course, that's the first step of any kind of editorial process: reading what's coming in, reading the submissions, reading the stories that I'm looking. I'm still deep into horror number 16, 2016, reading for the best horror, and I have to start making decisions, and I still have so much more to read. So unless something really jumps out at me, I'm not enjoying it. You know, it's like, it's a process. I have to get through these, and then hopefully, you know, there's some really good stories like, okay, wow, I'll read that again. That's really cool. So.
Process of elimination.
Well, not yet. I mean, that's when I have a list of my maybes of the stories, like 20 stories or more that I'm considering. I'm still in the process of reading some anthologies. I have a couple of anthologies I have to read that are really major anthologies that I need to look at, and hopefully I'll find a story or two in them that I like a lot that I'll take. But it's also at the same time I am trying to use the process of elimination so I can give my in-house editor, some stories, some names. I've committed to 4 stories, and that's it so far. And I really have to start committing to more who's going to have a fit. But what I was starting to say was, what I use as an example of the difference between dark fantasy and horror, is there's an exuberance in dark fantasy that doesn't exist in horror. And a perfect example of a writer of this is Richard Cadby's Sandman Slim novels. They're great. I love them. They're fun. And they're dark fantasy. Even though horrible things happen to people, there's something about it. There's an energy. It's not nihilistic. The endings are not nihilistic. There's something hopeful, optimistic about them. In a horror, something's lost. It's not necessarily nihilistic. Everyone doesn't have to die, but there's something that you know has traumatized people, the person, either the person surviving or someone or something. You know that the world is not all good, and that things are happening that are bad. And he writes his dark fantasies, but he also wrote a really good story in my doll collection. The one about the SP, I can't remember the titles now. A Good Boy Like You or something. Good Boys Like You. It was about the guys who were going into a house to rob it. I don't know if she's looking. Are you looking at it? Do you remember? Do you have the book in front of you?
You're muted. If you're talking, you're muted.
Oh.
She's Googling, I think.
Oh, is she? Such ambitious boys like you. I think it's something like that. And that's horror. I mean, that's out and out horror. That's not dark fantasy. It's okay. I found it.
Oh, good. Okay.
All right. It's such ambitious boys like you or something.
Ambitious Boys Like You. That's exactly what it is.
Thank you. It's
Yeah.
like,
I have it. I also have an ebook edition, so I was checking the table of contents. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, he can write. He obviously writes both, and he wrote a really, he writes dark fantasy, but he also writes horror. And some people can't. I mean, some people just write dark fantasy, and some people just write horror. And I guess ultimately it's a judgment call. I mean, I used to think it was just if it's dark enough, it's horror. But, I think my opinion about what the difference is has grown a little bit, has expanded a little bit.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about any of the stories in Children of Lovecraft, or has it been too long since you selected them?
I don't remember anything. I mean, yeah. I mean,
Well, the title is Children of Lovecraft.
if you have a question about one.
No, not really. Rick was.
I really love the stories. I mean, I'm taking a couple of stories from that for the year's best. I'm taking Nesters by
Okay.
Siobhan Carroll. For some reason, I always get, I should not say this because if they see this, they'll be really hurt. But for some reason, get Siobhan Carroll and A.C. Wise mixed up as to who wrote
Yeah,
what.
no, you're right about who wrote that. Yeah, Nesters.
Because I have both of them in that book. But Nesters it takes place in Depression time, Dust Bowl. And I think the other story I'm taking from that is by Olivia Llewellyn, which is actually a science fiction Lovecraftian story, which is, I think, really brilliant and weird. And
Bright
hard.
Crown of Joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. But I'm happy with how it came out. I mean, sometimes you're happier than other times with, I mean, I've done a lot of anthologies and some are not as I would have liked them to be. I mean, they're not unsuccessful necessarily, but I may not be as enthusiastic about how they came out as other anthologies of mine, but I'm happy with this one. I really think it worked.
Well, speaking of this one, and I guess we'll wrap up soon, but speaking of this one, is there a difference in your mind between the labels of Lovecraftian horror and cosmic horror? Do you see Lovecraftian horror as more pastiche?
No, well, it's Lovecraftian horror includes cosmic horror. I mean, Lovecraft's work was cosmic horror, so I think it's not that it's different. I think it's a part of it. In fact, I look more for the cosmic horror of Lovecraftian work. That's what I use, I think, more than anything else. Certainly not the language or the characterizations, because I want literate and well-rounded characters. So that's what I'm pushing, and when I do a Lovecraftian anthology, it's the cosmic horror of it as much as anything else, more than anything else, probably. So I don't think it's like separate; it's part of it.
Lovecraftian pastiche rarely interests me. I think you feel the same way.
I hated them. I mean,
Yeah.
I enjoyed them when I was young, but it's like, no, I don't want to read this. I mean, you could go back to Lovecraft. I don't want to. I'd rather read something that takes off from that, that's more interesting than that, and it uses it as a springboard. And that's, same thing with my Alice anthology. I did not want people to rewrite Alice in Wonderland stories. Most of the stories in that anthology, well, many of them have Alice as a character, but not necessarily the Alice from the books. So yeah, I mean, to me that's more interesting. I didn't want the fairy tale anthologies. The Terry Windling and I edited the Snow White Blood Red series. We didn't want to have people slavishly retelling the stories. Occasionally we did have stories like that, but as time went on, we were more interested in the reimagining of the fairy tale, like an update, a different. I don't know who the heck that is. It's going to keep ringing. Hold on. Can you hang on a second?
Yep, sure.
A big screaming, yelling match now. That'd be great.
Yeah.
It was on robocall. And probably when I go back, Amber will still be yakking at me. I don't know what you wanted. I hate this. Sorry about that. Talking behind my back.
So what projects are you working on right now? What's coming out soon, next year or so?
Well, the Hallows Eve, which is not going to be called Hallows Eve. We don't know what it's going to be called because the publisher wants to have a more general title, so we're working on the title. But that's a Halloween anthology that's under the aegis of HWA. That's coming out in the fall. And the Alice anthology, Mad Hatters and March Hares, is coming out in the fall. And my best horror, if we're lucky, will come out this summer. and that I'm working on a couple that I can't talk about. That I never talk about until I'm almost done.
Can you talk about who's in the Halloween anthology or not yet?
Yeah, let me get the table of contents up. SP. Okay. Yeah. Hold on. Sorry.
SPOB to it, yeah.
Hold on a second. Hang on. All right, where is it? Yeah. Okay, hang on a second here. Here we are. Uh-oh, where are we? Watch. Okay. Shauna McGuire, Stephen Graham Jones, Jonathan Maybury, Joanna Parapinski. I don't know how to pronounce her name correctly. I've never heard of her. We did have an open reading for that. Garth Nix, Kate Jones, Jeffrey Ford, Kelly Armstrong, S.P. Miskowski, Brian.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Elise Fourier-Eady, Eric Winyard, Paul Kane, Pat Cadigan, John Langan, and John Little. And let me come back to you if I can find you guys. Okay, there.
I'm looking forward to reading that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It came out really well. Yeah, and yes, we had an open reading period for that. So
SP blew me away with the story, and was it October Dreams 1 or 2, SP? So I'm glad that she's in your Halloween anthology.
October Dreams 2, yes.
October Dreams 2, yeah.
it's really clever. It's good.
Good.
Oh, that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and yes, we had. That was one where you have to have the guidelines: no children, no children, no children. And the reason we said that is because we knew everyone would write about children and Halloween, even though we did end up buying some stories about kids. But we didn't want like a glut of them. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, guys. Do we have any more questions for Ellen before we let her go? No.
Yeah, I got one. How many conventions do you end up going to in a year?
Oh, about 6 or 7, I guess, maybe the most. It depends. The ones I regularly go to World Fantasy, StokerCon, ReaderCon, WorldCon. Usually ICFA, the Conference of Fantastic, although I'm not going this year. So, I mean, it depends. And I'm going to, if I'm invited to, sometimes I'm invited to one in Australia. I'm not sure it's announced yet, but I'm guessed at an Australian one. So I guess maybe 5 or 6, unless I have, approximately. I have like 4 or 5 that I regularly go to wherever they are.
And you're the guest of honor at Necronomicon this year.
Oh, that's another, right. But see, I never went to that one before because they would always conflict with WorldCon. So yes, I'm going to be guest of honor at Necronomicon. I think they just recently announced that. So yes, that'll be fun.
All right.
Well,
thank you, Ellen. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
I'm hacking away.
What's that?
I'm sorry I lost my voice. We're almost.
Oh, no, that's fine. Don't have any control over that. All right. Well, thanks for being on the show, Ellen. And all you got to do to exit is just close your browser.
Okay. Great seeing you. Nice to see you guys.
Good to see you too.
Bye,
we'll see
Ellen.
you at Necronomicon.
See you, Ellen.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
Bye. All right. Children of Lovecraft, edited by Ellen Datlow. There it is. And some great stories in here, including one by Stephen Graham Jones, who was on the show last week. So great. He was a great guest too. So, all right. So what else? This will be out in about a week. I'm holding up, for those listening later, The Endless Fall and Other Weird Fictions by Jeffrey Thomas.
Great collection.
Yeah, Matt introduced this book. Introduction by Matt Carpenter. So, what did I say I was paying you for that?
The usual fee.
Great introduction by Matt Carpenter and great stories by Jeff. Kelly.
What?
You're a big fan of Rings. You went and saw Rings?
Oh, geez, yeah, I went and saw Rings, you guys. Let's see. What can I say about this? Don't go see it. It does. I will say this, without giving anything away. It has an amazing opening sequence where, if you're all familiar with the story of Ring, this is the one where you put the videotape or the video cassette in the player, and then you get a phone call that says 7 days, and 7 days later, the gal crawls out of your television set and kills you. The first one is actually a pretty decent little flick. And this has a great opening segment where the person who is cursed is on a plane in flight when all of the screens on the seats start to flicker. And I was like, wow, this is a very strong ending. And it goes down faster than that plane did for the rest of the film. So
Okay, so don't go see Rings.
yeah, pass on that one.
I loved the original one. I think I saw it in about 2000, and just absolutely loved it. So much fun, so dark, so strange, and so much fun. And I disliked all of the sequels. You know, I tried watching one of the sequels. It was not very interesting. The next one was really bad, and I didn't finish watching it. So.
It made me wonder when things had changed, especially for horror films, that we can no longer have adults playing adult roles in horror films. It is all teenagers now. With Ring, that was Naomi Watts, you know, and she's not an old person, but she's an adult, and she's playing I believe she was a newspaper reporter or something like that. But
yes,
it, it had a lot of the gravitas that, say, The Omen did when you had Gregory Peck as an ambassador to England. You bought that no problem. And then in the remake of The Omen, you've got Liv Schreiber as a ambassador to England, and I'm like, I'm not sure I buy this 29-year-old kid as the ambassador. And so at some point it all shifted, and we can no longer see adults in horror films. And I don't get it.
I saw a very interesting article that I read about the future of Hollywood and how it's going to be, movie making is going to be like the next industry to be basically crushed and turned on its head by the internet and internet technology, much like the book publication industry has. That when you go on the set of a modern movie and there are like 300 people, a lot of them are hanging around not doing very much, but they're contractually, because of their union specified roles. I don't even remember the name of this article, but there was the thought that a lot of the box office in the US keeps shrinking, and a lot of what gets made makes its money overseas. And so a lot of what gets sent overseas has to be something that will be easily apprehended by the audience, say in a subtitled version. Do you see what I mean? So that something with a very complex dialogue or plot is much less likely to get greenlit than something that is extremely simple to comprehend or has like.
So the movies are going to be dumbed down. That's what you're saying,
right? Like the big blockbuster shoot 'em ups, you know.
But I think you're right. But I think that on the part of filmmakers, that's an excuse, because you can make a film that is fairly straightforward and that doesn't have a lot of dialogue. I mean, we just rewatched Fury Road last night, and I think that's great storytelling. You can tell a great story and still, make it a story that can be apprehended by a worldwide audience. And it can be pretty straightforward. It doesn't have to even have a lot of dialogue. But I think it's just a lack of imagination on the part of a lot of people in Hollywood who want to package something, and then they package something and they find out that audiences don't like it. So then they say, oh, well, okay, well, we'll package it and send it somewhere else. And, it'll be more exotic over there. And so, it's just a lack of imagination, I think.
Yeah,
it also has to do with the market, of course, but I think a lot of it is just giving in to a corporate mentality about making movies.
And the other thing is the marketing is all going like being twisted on its head. I just watched Love and Friendship, that adaptation of that unpublished Jane Austen novel, Lady Susan. It's got Kate Beckinsale in it, and it was made by Amazon and market it as a movie for streaming only.
Yeah.
And it's a period piece, and it would have been lovely on the big screen with all the costumes and whatnot. But it was made by a streaming company to sell as such. I think it's all going to be mixed up, and we'll be lucky to have those smaller companies, because they're going to do more intelligent or appealing shows for at least I've found, for, like the Duffer Brothers, which Kelly's working on getting them here as guests, I think.
Say what? Boy, if I'd have known Kelly had that kind of pull, I would have invited him to be on this show earlier.
Boy, if I had known I'd had that kind of pull, I wouldn't have accepted to be on this show.
Now, see, the thing is here, I believe everything you say, Kelly. So, anyway, their season 2 of Stranger Things looks to be really great.
I got to say, you guys know I did not season 1 of Stranger Things. I think I'm the only person out there, maybe. But season 2, that trailer does look damn good.
Yeah, that looks fun. And you didn't hate the first season. I thought you just thought it was a little long.
Yeah, it's just dragged out.
Right.
Too many episodes. But no, I did not hate it at all.
I think it's interesting how hard film companies try to turn out something, package something that will be appealing, and they test audiences and they look at the demographic they're aiming for, and they try to, market something that will be appealing. And the thing that always strikes a chord with an audience and it always just takes off and does well is something weird, is something bizarre, is something unexpected. It's the Babadook, it's the Witch, it's Stranger Things. It's always something that's unexpected. People are not looking for it. You wouldn't think there would be an immediate audience for it, but it takes off because it's fresh, it's different, it has a different point of view.
Yeah, I'd agree with that completely.
I was watching the Babadook, and the thing I was thinking through the whole thing was, man, she is a really bad mom. And I don't mean when the bad things happen. I mean, at the beginning of the movie, she's a bad mom.
Yeah.
Really? I was thinking.
I know what you're saying, but I bought into it. I totally identified.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Understood where she was coming from. So.
Yeah, I was thinking if I had a kid like that, I'd be praying for a monster to come grab him.
Make him ride on the roof of the car. Yeah.
You know what? I heard a funny bit about, you want to see a real episode of Survivors. You take a road trip across the country with your whole family and nobody gets voted out of the car.
Well, on the flip side of all this, we're in a golden age of television. We were talking about Stranger Things a minute ago. Somebody told me recently that he watched Legion and really, really liked it, and that I need to watch it. The first episode of Legion.
I watched that
amongst us.
This is the blurring of who's doing the producing. It used to be a film company would make a movie, and then Netflix would present it. And now Netflix is creating content straight to stream.
I think it's great. So what about Legion, Kelly?
I really dug it. Legion ties into the X-Men movies, and if you're a Marvel fan, the character Legion is Charles Xavier's son. Now, they didn't bring that up in the series yet, but the logo for Legion has a big X through the O in the word Legion, and it's the X-Men X that you see on their shoulders in all of the movies and all that. So it's going to tie in somehow. I'm not sure exactly how, but I thought it was just a really beautiful, if a bit confusing, pilot. The photography was amazing. The acting was really cool. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, I'll drop my $1.99 on it then at Amazon.
Yeah, that's the only bummer, is that it's either FX or FXX that's putting it out, and their app is a pay for app, or you have to have the cable channel. I don't have the cable channel either. I'm pretty much off the grid as far as that goes, so I had to do the same thing, is drop the $2 just to see the first episode. And I'm not sure that I like that I'm going to have to do that for, especially if it gets a 22 episode run or something like that.
Well, you can pay for the entire season usually with these things at a reduced rate. Excuse me.
Okay.
But yeah, not to go too far off on a tangent, but shows like channels like the CW, for example. If you like The Flash, if you like Legion of Legends of Tomorrow, they've got their app where anybody can watch it, and there's commercials
Right.
sprinkled throughout as if you're watching it live. So I think that's really the way to go. I think FX is losing out doing it this way, but I'm sure they're not going to feel that. I mean, it's not the way I would do it. Let's just put it more accurately.
I was a little surprised to find out that that's how they were doing it, because it did seem like you were going to lose viewership, but maybe they don't have the advertising that CW has, and they can't afford to do that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I wasn't sure about it, so you've convinced me. I'll check out Legion.
Your mileage may vary. Peter Rawlik gave it a big fat nope.
But there's a caveat there because he's really sick, right?
Right.
So.
Plus, he has bad taste.
So a listener, Lincoln Brown, I'm not going to discuss this today because I want Rick and a couple of the others to be here. But once it's discussed, maybe we can do this next week or the week after. Favorite Lovecraftian anthologies from the past, 50 years. I don't know how many I can name, but we'll name a few.
God.
But anyway, I just want to get you thinking about it.
Scanner style.
We don't have to list, each of us, we don't have to list 20 apiece, maybe 4 or 5, something like that. So.
Okay, this is good. My preview is, if you're going to pick one, the original Dead But Dreaming.
Yeah, that's true.
It has first of all, it had about 6 straight up masterpieces in it. And it had one of the very best Lovecraftian stories. It's never been reprinted elsewhere. Called Final Draft by Annandale. I think it's David Annandale. It's just wonderful.
It's great that people can buy this book now, because for a long time, you could not get Dead But Dreaming, the original anthology, for less than like $100.
The original print one was 75 books.
Yeah.
And what's funny about that is, this was back when I started expanding my buying, and I wanted to pick it all up. I went on barnesandnobles.com, and I think I got the very last copy available for sale anywhere at the regular price. It cost me $14-15. Then after that, it suddenly shot up. I didn't understand all this book selling stuff.
Thanks to Tom Lynch, I have the original signed by a couple people, and I've got the new edition that I bought. So, yeah, that's a good point. If you had to pick one, Dead But Dreaming would be a good pick.
Well, just a place to start.
We'll talk about that.
Place to start.
Yeah. I'm wondering if any of you, I know Kelly have seen Nocturnal Animals. It's not horror. It's I don't know what it is, actually. Amy Adams, Michael Shannon, Jake Gyllenhaal. Well, don't see it.
Don't know anything about it.
I don't even know how to describe this movie, other than it's supposed to be really, really good, and I thought it really, really wasn't. So I was under the impression, I guess, that a lot of writers had seen it, because there's one of the protagonists is a writer. So I think I've seen people talking on Facebook about it. I don't know.
What's the premise?
That's a challenge too. This lady, Amy Adams, she gets a manuscript from her ex-husband and reads the manuscript. She's having marriage troubles. She's having troubles in her current marriage. She reads the manuscript, and the movie flips back and forth between her and the scenes that are playing out in the manuscript. And some of them are pretty brutal. Which is fine if it was a great story, but I don't know. I'm just interested if there's anybody else out there that thought it was a wonderful movie. So,
haven't seen it. Sorry.
Yeah, I did hear a lot of praise for it, though. So you've got me very interested in seeing it now and seeing which way I fall.
So you mentioned, Kelly, earlier in the day, Stephen Graham Jones. He was our guest last week, and talking about stealing stuff. Talk about that. So I love that too.
I just loved how candid he was. I think that as writers, we all latch on to stuff we liked in something else and then put our own spin on it in other stories. I loved how, while he was talking about mongrels, you asked him about Near Dark, and he was like, "Oh my God, that was totally the blueprint for mongrels." And then I took this from The Howling, and I took this from Wolfen, and I just loved how candid he was about that, and just how candid he was. I think that to date, that was probably my favorite episode because of how unabashedly geeky he was. The conversation going into comics and how he walked out spending $70 at the comic book shop and things like that. And everything he talked about, you and I talked about how honest he was about how much he just the joy of reading to him, and that he sat down and read all 4 Twilight books in a week. Things like that.
Whereas some people would look askance at that, and you read what you enjoy. Isn't reading supposed to be fun?
Right. Right. Now, and the funny thing is, I tried to read that first Twilight book, and I thought it was just awful, but I've never been one to bash, a lot of the horror community throws out, oh, well, I'm watching a movie with vampires, but not sparkly vampires and things like that. And I'm like, I'm not sure what the point of complaining about this incredibly successful franchise is. This book was obviously not for you.
I just read Sarah Pinborough's latest novel. I think I told you guys in an email. It's called Behind Her Eyes. And God, it was fun. It was so much fun. And there were a couple of things in it that made me pause and made me think, I don't really buy that. I don't really believe in this. So I don't know if it, inserting it into this kind of novel I don't know if it's going to work for me. But, she made it work, and she made it a lot of fun. And it was a real page turner. So...
What's the premise of that book?
It's a little hard to talk about without giving anything away. I don't want to spoil anything, but it has to do. I'll just tell you that what happens in the first few pages. So that's not really a spoiler. A youngish, early 30s single mom living in London. She has this encounter with a really fascinating man at a bar. They really click. They get along really well. He's kind of the thing, that she's been looking for, the kind of partner that she would love to have. They share an intimate moment. And then she goes to work the next day and finds out that he is her married boss. And it's not what you would think from just the bare bones premise. It really takes off in a lot of interesting directions, and has a surprising twist to it that I think was really, I said it was fiendishly clever. It's sort of a diabolical ending, but a lot of fun to read. Easy to read and a lot of fun to read, but very, very cleverly constructed. And like I said, there are a couple of things you have to buy into about that will make the story work or not work for you. And I can understand why some people would just say, I don't buy into this. But I did. I chose to just accept it and accept the fact that the characters believed in it enough to make them at least psychologically able to do what they did.
What's the title of that one again?
Behind Her Eyes.
Right.
And it's Sarah Pinborough.
Cool.
Okay. Well, we have some prizes to give away. If you want them, send an email to lovecrafteasinprizes@gmail.com. Let me put them out on the screen there. One of the books, and put in the subject line of the email, put the title of the book that you want me to, if you want to be in the random drawing. So this is Eldritch Embraces. I cannot believe this.
There have been any number of books like this that have come out over the years.
Speaking of not looking down on books, I just did it, didn't I? Without even reading.
You did. You missed that book.
I just
So,
don't-
there have been a lot of books like this. You know, going back to like 2005, there was Eldritch Blue, edited by Kevin O'Brien, which kind of had the same concept. There were at least two anthologies of Lovecraft erotica. One was called Cthulhu Erotica.
Right.
There was even supposed to be a sequel to it. I forget what the other one was. It was like Eldritch Whispers or something like that.
Hmm.
So
well, this one's Eldritch Embraces.
right.
So put that in the subject of your email. Putting the love back in Lovecraft. That's what I really love about this.
You know what? Stephen Graham Jones is going to love that book, and that
I'm
makes
sorry,
it okay.
Kelly.
by
It
me.
doesn't have porn in it. I don't think.
I'll let
Oh,
you know.
well, why bother?
There's Bow Wow,
And
Shake a Bow Wow, Lovecraft.
All right, and the other book is Edge of Dark Water by Joe Lansdale, and that's courtesy of Kevin Wilson. Thanks, Kevin. So Lovecraft eZine prizes at gmail.com, and I'll use random.org to choose somebody about a week from now. So that's it. I think we have anything else to talk about before we sign off? I don't think so.
Think I'm good.
All right.
Just we'll have to get Nils on here sometime soon to go over what's the update on Necronomicon. It's
Oh, yes.
around the corner. It's like 6 months away.
Oh, I
That's
should
coming up.
brag. Before we go, I should brag. I have
Yeah.
I have news. I have some
News?
good news. I have 2 books coming out from Journalstone this year.
Oh,
Oh,
tell me
nice.
about it.
Yes, called "Strange is the Night" is the story collection, and it includes 2 stories that I wrote for Joe Pulver edited anthologies. So thank you, Joe, and a story edited by Mike Davis. Thank you, Mike.
Mhm.
And the novel is called "I Wish I Was Like You," as in the Nirvana song. I wish I was like you.
Oh,
That's
That's
great news.
And I will say that on my book,
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Pickman's Gallery, I'm starting to read now for that, and so I think the book's going to start to take shape very nicely.
Good. Did you get
Great.
some more stories after I posted? Did it pick up? Did you get some more people?
Yes, several, and I've got some
Good.
actually some nice big name authors who are at least promising me they'll send me something. Maybe they just did that to shut me up, though. I don't know.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching and listening. And next week, I believe we have Nathan Carson, and we will see you then.